rights and a much heralded venture there. Now they're selling out. Nevil.
Well, that was a failure on the share market for the same reason as the Synlait one didn't take off, is that investors still need a return and they can't wait around. That was, again, a venture that lacked the amount of capital from the start, and even the Singaporeans are not going to be throwing their money around. They've looked very carefully at it. They're going to look carefully at who's going to manage Uruguay, after they've bitten a bigger chunk of it, and also who's going to cough up $60 million to complete the program there. But this is peanuts for Olam. I mean, these are
They're
amounts
a huge
of
company,
money.
aren't they?
This is sort of money that falls out of their back pocket. I mean, it's just pathetic. Olam went and spent, $250 million US buying a flavours company in America just last week.
Right. Well, moving on to matters closer to home. Waiheke Island, dogs over there attacking sheep and newborn lambs. This is an issue that comes up at this time of year, Keith, but it's a very bad look for the urban population and for any tourists. And Waiheke Island is a pretty big tourist destination within New Zealand, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's more story than it is reality. I mean, this happens all the time, and it happens all around the country. And there are more dogs in urban areas. Waiheke is, let's face it, Remuera on the island. And that sort of thing is going to happen while there's farming going alongside. I mean, it happens in Cornwall Park on a regular basis as well. That's in the middle of a city. There's a lot of dogs on the loose. I mean, I don't see that as being a big issue, quite frankly.
They should perhaps breed those sheep that bite.
Yeah, they should, yes.
And,
like in the movie.
Nevil, what about these latest dirty dairying fines? That's another bad look, isn't it, for that sector?
It certainly is. I don't have any personal knowledge of this particular case, but I guess it shows that somebody's monitoring it anyway, and $60,000 is a lot to hit a farmer with these days. Should
the fines be larger, do you think?
Well, I don't know about that.
What do you think, Keith?
I don't know. You'd have to look at what the relativities are in terms of what proportion is it. I mean, who's paying the fine? Is the factory paying the fine? Is the farmer paying the fine? If the farmer's paying the fine, and
it's a
lot of money.
That's the case happening there.
That's a lot of money. Yeah.
Right.
It'll put you off.
Yeah. Up next, we go behind the headlines making the rounds. Stay with us. Welcome back to Straight Talk. Now it's on to You Said It, the latest issues in the ag media which need more in-depth probing. Well, Keith, the government are back down on mining, or democracy in action, as Jerry Brownlee would have us believe?
They're back down, without question. I mean, you can see it's a back down. The statements they were making when they first issued their ideas for this new policy, and the statements they're making now are completely opposite ends of the spectrum. It's a back down.
What do you think, Nevil?
Well, I think the government should have actually stood up to this media campaign with the anti-mining people. I mean, we're actually further back now than when we started.
But why didn't they have the facts and figures to back up what they were saying?
Well, no, that's not quite right, because I remember, I mean, I'm not taking credit for it, but we published quite a lot of material from the mining industry before the election to get this issue up on the front page, the value of minerals locked up in New Zealand. And obviously this is based on some geological surveys, but it is there, and there's no question that more needs to be known about it. And how it sort of got derailed, I'm not quite sure.
Well, I think you would say, Keith, wouldn't you, just government incompetence in terms of putting the idea out there and not having information that the public could grab hold of and say this is going to deliver us X amount of economic value?
Yes, I think you could say the government's position on this was emotional rather than rational at the beginning. And the problem that we have with it is that they've never quantified exactly what they mean by minerals. Do they mean oil drilling in the deep trenches off New Zealand? Do they mean coal and more coal to China? Or what do they mean? Nobody said anything about it. I've heard all about gold in Northland. Well, I come from Northland, and I tell you how much gold there is in Northland. It was mostly on people's ring fingers, and this has been talked about before, but the quantities are so small and it's almost irrelevant to be thinking about digging holes in the ground for it.
No, that's not quite right, because there is actually quite a lot of high degree of mineralisation and quite a lot of geological knowledge. But what you need to do is, it's quite a long-term process to actually go out and start digging a few holes and finding out whether the strata is there. So I think there certainly was a lack of nous on the part of the government to sell the value of the mining industry to the public. But I think the anti-mining lobby, once it got going, had the media on its side, and it was a one-way ticket from there.
Well, we'll see what happens further on. Now, another issue, biosecurity. Keith, recent story about a youngster who brought back snakes from overseas, tried to sell them on the internet and was found out. Why didn't our systems pick these up at the airport?
Because we don't care about biosecurity. We never have done. We've got the slackest biosecurity in the world. We put signs up saying throw your sandwiches in the bin, and they think that's biosecurity. And all you have to do is look around the country at things like Didymo. You look at how it was so easy to bring the calcivirus in for the rabbits. Anybody who wants to bring stuff into New Zealand brings it in whenever they feel like it.
What do you think, Neville?
Oh, I think that's been a bit unfair on the authorities, because you don't want too much regulation that becomes uncomfortable to travel. But snakes, they're pretty hard to pick up.
We've kept them out for a long time. We don't want them coming in now.
You can get too fixated on snakes, I think.
Oh, well, moving on. The Zespri court hearings at the moment, Neville. Turners and growers, this is continuing their campaign to open up kiwi fruit exports.
Well, it's just the start of it, and it's interesting that this is basically a legal discussion about freedom and whether these regulations restrict growers, kiwi fruit growers, or force them to sell their product to one organisation. So I'm rather hoping the courts latch on to that side of the argument.
What do you think, Keith? You'd be a kiwi fruit fan?
No, I'm not actually.
Aren't you? Oh, never mind.
Not necessarily. No, I mean, I really have no feelings either way about this. I mean, it is a legal conversation about freedom, and that sort of debate will go on in New Zealand for a very long time. We talk about freedom at the moment. There are discussions about making the Students' Union, for example, non-compulsory. But if you're a winemaker in New Zealand, you've got no choice. You have to belong to New Zealand wine growers. Right. So you're a doctor, you have to belong to the Medical Association. Right. What is freedom?
Yeah. Now, Neville, Jacqueline Roworth from Massey University, she's a pretty outspoken person. She's been making some comments regarding New Zealand farmers not receiving subsidies but not getting the support they need from the urban sector to carry on their business, and she says that having to meet all the environmental constraints they do, this is rather a bizarre situation. What do you think?
Well, Jacqueline's won a number of prizes for her communication in the agricultural sector and thinks that farmers are a bit of should be a protected species. I think the problem is that the returns that you get from the actual farming seem to be very low compared with what people are buying, and they're certainly paying more for it. But food has also become cheaper, so her arguments have some weight, but I think we've got to actually understand farming better and figure out some way that those returns are more realistic, and whether it's farmers accepting more market signals or stop campaigning for things that are actually lost causes. I
always remember Mike Moore saying years ago that the Europeans kept their farmers as pets. We don't want to be doing that, do we, Keith?
Well, the reason they keep their farmers as pets is because they've allowed agriculture to be corporatised to an extreme degree. The classic case, of course, is Nestlé. Now, Nestlé was a Swiss farming cooperative. It's now the biggest food company in the world. And Swiss farmers are paid a subsidy by the Swiss government to keep those nice cows with the bells in the paddocks. There's no profit in Swiss farming anymore. Now, we keep trying to go down that path and trying to go down that path. We don't actually have enough tourists compared with Switzerland to be able to pay our farmers to be part of the tourism sector. However, we're getting close to that, and the more we compromise and the more we fall into the corporate world that reduces the value of natural foods and increases the value of crap, well, we're going to go the same way as Nestlé.
Well, one issue that tourists would certainly care somewhat about, Neville, pylons, the march of the pylons. There was a big spread in the New Zealand Herald at the weekend about these rather